The moon hung low, heavy and luminous, its light spilling over the slumbering village of Bantu. The night was still, except for the rustling of palm leaves swaying in the breeze and the occasional chirp of a cricket. The villagers slept soundly, wrapped in dreams of harvest and family, blissfully unaware of the chaos brewing on the outskirts of their community. Suddenly, the peace was shattered by a sharp, piercing scream. It sliced through the air like the cry of a wounded animal. Dogs barked in alarm, and lamps were lit as villagers stumbled out of their huts, rubbing the sleep from their eyes. In the distance, the sound of pounding feet grew louder, a desperate rhythm against the earth. Adia was running. Her feet were bare, leaving smudged prints in the dusty path. Her loose wrapper fluttered behind her, and her swollen belly, a testament to the life she carried, rose and fell with every heaving breath. Tears streamed down her face, mixing with sweat as she fled into the darkness. Behind her, a group of women followed, their torches burning like restless spirits, their voices calling out in anger. "Adia, you cannot run forever," one of the women shouted. "You've brought shame upon this village," cried another. Adia pushed herself harder, her chest tightening as exhaustion threatened to overtake her. She wasn't just running for herself, she was running for the child growing within her, a child she had sworn to protect, no matter the cost. Her flight brought her to the edge of the village, where the ancient Baobab tree loomed like a silent sentinel. Its enormous trunk seemed to stretch endlessly into the heavens, its roots weaving into the earth like a network of veins. The tree was sacred, a connection between the living and the ancestors. It was said that the spirits of the departed found refuge in its hollow trunk, and the villagers often left offerings at its base. Adia collapsed at the foot of the tree, her arms wrapping tightly around its rough bark. "Spirits of the Baobab," she whispered, her voice hoarse and trembling. "I beg you, protect me and my child. If you are watching, help us now." The women slowed their approach, their torches casting eerie shadows on the tree's massive trunk. They hesitated, shifting uneasily as the full weight of the Baobab's presence settled over them. Naima, the eldest of the women and a respected figure in the village, stepped forward. Her voice, usually measured and calm, was sharp with disdain. "Adia," she said, pointing an accusing finger, "you have brought this shame upon yourself. You carry the child of madness, a child who should not be born." Adia lifted her head, her dark eyes blazing with desperation. "You don't understand," she cried. "This child is not a curse. He is a gift from the spirits." "Do not speak of spirits so lightly," Naima snapped. "We are not fools. That child grows in your womb because of Obasi, the madman who haunts our village. And you expect us to believe otherwise." The other women muttered in agreement, their voices filled with anger and fear. Adia's fingers dug into the tree bark as though seeking strength from its ancient roots. "If you harm this child," she said, her voice trembling but resolute, "you will bring calamity upon us all. The Baobab will cry for eternity, and this village will wither like a leaf in the dry season." Her words hung in the air like a warning, sending a ripple of unease through the crowd. The Baobab was not to be trifled with. Even the boldest among them felt their courage waver at the thought of its wrath. Naima narrowed her eyes. "If you truly believe this child is blessed," she said, "then prove it. Tell us your story. Tell us why we should spare you." Adia hesitated, her breath still ragged, but she knew this was her only chance. Slowly, she began to speak. Adia had always been a beloved member of the community. Married at 20 to Kofi, a kind and hardworking farmer, she had been the envy of many women in the village. Their love was evident in the way they laughed together, shared their meals, and dreamt of the children they would one day raise. But as the seasons passed, the blessings of motherhood eluded them. Year after year, Adia's womb remained barren. At first, the villagers offered kind words and encouragement. "Your time will come," they would say. But as the years stretched on, their sympathy turned to pity and then to whispers. "They have angered the gods somehow," one woman said behind her hand. "Perhaps Adia is barren," another suggested. "No," a man countered. "It is Kofi who is at fault. What kind of man cannot give his wife a child?" The whispers reached Adia's ears, and though she tried to ignore them, they cut deep. She prayed to the ancestors, made offerings at the village shrine, and even visited a renowned healer in the neighboring town. Kofi, ever patient and loving, reassured her that their time would come. But she could see the sadness in his eyes whenever he watched other fathers teaching their sons to farm or playing with their daughters in the fields. One evening, while Kofi was working late in the fields, Adia went to the river to fetch water. The sun was setting, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink, and the river sparkled like molten gold. As she knelt by the water's edge, she heard a sound, strange, melodic humming that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at once. She looked up and saw him, Obasi, the madman of the village. His unkempt hair hung in wild tangles, and his clothes were little more than rags, but his presence was commanding. He stood on the opposite bank of the river, his eyes gleaming with an intensity that made Adia shiver. "Adia," he said, his voice deep and resonant. "You seek a child, do you not?" Her breath caught in her throat. How did he know? She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came. "The spirits have chosen you," Obasi continued. "Your womb will carry a child who will change the fate of this village. But his arrival will not come without sacrifice." Adia's skin prickled. "What are you saying?" she whispered. Obasi smiled, a strange, knowing smile. "Trust the spirits even when the world turns against you." And with that, he turned and disappeared into the forest. Adia rushed home, her mind racing. She tried to dismiss his words as the ramblings of a madman, but they lingered in her thoughts. A week later, when she discovered she was with child, her disbelief turned to awe. The news of Adia's pregnancy spread quickly, but instead of congratulations, she was met with suspicion and scorn. How can she be pregnant now, after all these years? One woman asked. Her husband has been working in the fields for weeks. It must be Obasi's doing, another whispered. I saw her by the river that night. The whispers reached Kofi, who confronted Adia with a mixture of confusion and pain. Adia, he said, his voice trembling. Tell me the truth. Is the child mine? Adia's eyes filled with tears. Kofi, I swear I have not betrayed you, she said. This child is a blessing from the spirits. But Kofi could not reconcile her words with the rumors. The man who had once been her greatest support walked away that night and never returned. Alone and shunned by the village, Adia sought refuge beneath the Baobab tree. She poured out her fears and sorrows to the ancient giant, praying for guidance. When Adia's child was born, the villagers could not deny that he was extraordinary. His eyes were bright as the sky at dawn, and his laughter carried a melody that seemed to lift the spirits of all who heard it. But his presence brought more than joy. Strange and wondrous things began to happen. Crops that had struggled to grow flourished wherever the boy crawled. The river, which had been drying, flowed fuller and clearer than it had in years. Even the baobab seemed to thrive, its leaves greener, and its fruit more abundant than anyone could remember. Perhaps the child is a blessing after all, some villagers said, but others were unconvinced. It is a trick, they muttered. A child born of madness cannot bring good fortune. The following year, when the rains failed and famine threatened the village, the whispers of doubt turned into cries of accusation. This is his doing, one man shouted. The child has angered the gods. We must rid ourselves of this curse, another said. Desperate to protect her son, Adia fled once more to the baobab, cradling him in her arms. She knelt at its base, her tears soaking into its roots. Spirits of the tree, she whispered, if you hear me, help us. I have done everything you asked. I have kept faith even as the world turned against me. Please, do not let them harm my child. The torches of the villagers flickered in the distance, their shouts growing louder as they approached. Adia pressed her forehead against the tree's bark, her voice breaking. If you are truly here, if you truly chose me for this purpose, show them your power. The villagers arrived, their faces twisted in anger and fear. Nema stood at the front, her staff raised as a symbol of authority. Adia, she called, her voice cold and commanding. Step away from the tree and bring the child forward. We cannot allow this curse to remain among us. Adia stood, clutching her son tightly. This child is not a curse, she said, her voice trembling but resolute. He is the hope of this village. If you harm him, you will doom us all. Ema's eyes narrowed. Enough of your lies. We have suffered long enough. Step aside, or we will take him by force." Adia shook her head, tears streaming down her face. "If you must take me, then take me. But spare my son. He has done nothing wrong." The villagers surged forward, but as they neared the Baobab, a sudden wind swept through the clearing. It was strong and cold, carrying the scent of earth and rain. The torches flickered and went out, plunging the area into darkness. The villagers gasped and stumbled back, their fear palpable. From the heart of the Baobab came a deep, resonant groan, like the sound of the earth itself awakening. The tree's massive branches trembled, and its leaves began to glow with a soft, ethereal light. The villagers froze, their eyes wide with terror and awe. A voice, deep and ancient, seemed to echo from the tree itself. It was neither male nor female, but carried the weight of centuries. "You dared to harm the child of the spirits," it boomed. "Have you forgotten the ways of your ancestors? Have you forgotten the covenant made with this tree, with this land?" The villagers fell to their knees, trembling. Nema dropped her staff, her face pale as ash. "Great spirits," she stammered, "forgive us, we did not understand." The voice continued, unwavering. "This child is a gift, a bridge between the living and the spirits. He carries the power to heal this land, to bring abundance where there is famine. But your fear blinds you. If you harm him, you will bring ruin upon yourselves." Adia, still holding her son, stared up at the tree in wonder. She felt a warmth radiating from its trunk, a comforting presence that filled her with strength. "Thank you," she whispered. The glowing light from the tree intensified, bathing the clearing in a soft radiance. The villagers watched in silence as the drought-stricken ground around the Baobab began to change. Grass sprouted where there had been only dust, and the air grew cool and fresh. A rumble came from the distance, and moments later, the first drops of rain began to fall. The villagers looked up, their faces wet with rain and tears. The drought was over. The spirits had spoken. From that day forward, everything changed. The villagers, humbled and repentant, treated Adia and her child with reverence. They began to understand that the boy was not a curse but a blessing, a living symbol of the connection between their world and the spirits. Adia's son grew quickly, his presence bringing prosperity to the village. The river flowed stronger than ever, the fields yielded bountiful harvests, and even the animals seemed healthier and more abundant. The Baobab tree, once simply a symbol of history, became a sacred site where the villagers gathered to give thanks. Nema, who had once led the charge against Adia, became her strongest supporter. She visited Adia's hut often, offering counsel and helping her raise the boy. "I was blind," Nema admitted one day, her voice heavy with regret. "But the spirits have shown me the truth. Your child is a gift to us all." Adia forgave her, knowing that forgiveness was a gift she could give in return for all she had endured. As the boy grew, his connection to the Baobab tree deepened. He often sat beneath its branches, speaking to it as though it were a trusted friend. The villagers believed he could hear the spirits directly, and they began to seek his guidance in times of trouble. Though he was young, his wisdom surpassed his years, and his presence brought peace to all who met him. Adia, too, found her place again in the village. Though Kofi never returned, she no longer mourned his absence. She found fulfillment in her son and in the community that had once turned against her. The pain of her past became a distant memory, replaced by the joy of seeing her son thrive. Years later, when Adia's son reached adulthood, he planted a small sapling beside the great Baobab tree. "This is for the future," he said, his voice calm and steady. "One day, this tree will stand as tall as its elder, and it will remind our descendants of the bond between the living and the spirits." The villagers gathered to witness the planting, their hearts full of hope. They had learned a valuable lesson that fear could blind them, but faith and understanding could bring them back to the light. The Baobab tree continued to stand tall, its branches reaching for the heavens. It became a symbol of resilience, faith, and the enduring power of the spirits. Generations later, the story of Adia and her son was still told beneath its shade, a tale of love, sacrifice, and redemption. And when the wind blew through its leaves, carrying the soft rustle of whispers, the villagers believed it was the voice of the spirits, reminding them to honor the past and protect the blessings of the present. Adia's name became synonymous with courage, and her son's legacy lived on, not just in the village but in the land itself. For as long as the Baobab stood, its roots deep in the earth and its branches reaching toward the sky, the people of Bantu would remember, even in the face of doubt and fear. The spirits are always watching, and the Baobab never cried again.
Thank you for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, please hit the like button and the bell notification icon.
Don't forget to subscribe.